Hey everyone, today I want to talk about a book that I recently finished and enjoyed, which is called Classical Literary Theory, and it is translated by Penelope Murray and T.S. Dorsch. First of all, let me tell you what this book is about. So it's a collection of writings from ancient Roman and Greek thinkers, Aristotle, Plato, Horace, and Longinus. These thinkers have laid a foundation for how we think about art and literature, how we criticize it today. It is a guide to how they analyzed poetry, drama, and other forms of storytelling. It is a mix of philosophy and advice for writers. Now, as soon as I started reading the introduction, I knew that I wanted to annotate this copy, and so I did. I'm really glad that I did because I want to return to this in the future. And I've also taken extensive notes in my commonplace book. On the first page of this introduction, there is a quote of T.S. Eliot that goes, "Our criticism from age to age will reflect the things that the age demands." Now, T.S. Eliot was one of the most influential poets, essayists, and literary critics of the 20th century. And this quote really resonated with me. I loved journaling about it, and basically it says that we criticize a work based on our own experiences and on the time and the world that we live in. Now, I want to take this quote and dive into this a little bit deeper. This could also serve, of course, as an example of how I use my commonplace book and how I take quotes from a novel that I read, a book that I read, and turn it into an exercise. T.S. Eliot's words suggest that criticism is not static or universal, but it evolves with the context of each age. This is also what I strongly believe, and so I think this is why this quote resonated with me so much. So the way that people evaluate and interpret literature, or any form of art, by the way, is deeply influenced by the cultural, the social, and the historical circumstances of their time. Of course, different generations are going to have different priorities. Society changes, and so new questions arise with each generation that may not have been that relevant when the work was first published. I want to read the first part of the introduction because it's so good and it might convince you to pick up this book as well. Literary criticism is a label that covers a number of different activities. In the narrow sense in which it is customarily used today, it refers to the analysis and interpretation of texts, but in its wider application, literary criticism is concerned with more fundamental questions about the nature and function of literature. What is literature? How is it created? What are its effects? How do we evaluate it? Literary criticism can include scholarly exegesis, evaluative judgment, prescriptive criticism, literary history and theory, and thus might be broadly defined as discourse about literature. But literature itself is not a stable or self-evident category, so that discourse will inevitably vary with the changing nature of the literature that is its object. As T.S. Eliot observed, our criticism from age to age will reflect the things that the age demands. In the Western tradition, attitudes to literature have been profoundly shaped by the great writers and thinkers of classical antiquity. So this is just a short excerpt of the introduction of this book. Something that I also marked and that I want to share with you is I marked the question of which of the two, art or nature, was the more important was debated for centuries. And reading this was so funny because I just finished The Decay of Lying by Oscar Wilde. And he was also talking about art and nature and the relation between them. And it was just so funny and so special reading this sentence right after I finished his essay. Now, like I said in the beginning, we have this collection of excerpts from the works of Greek and Roman thinkers. I must say that I had never read Plato, Longinus, Aristotle, or Horace. Oh my gosh, Horace. And I was feeling a bit intimidated to read this book because I hadn't read them. I believed that I would struggle reading this. And again, I got proven that we shouldn't fear books just because we think that they are too difficult for us. I'm really happy that I picked this up and that I challenged myself to read this, and it is way more accessible than I thought it would be. This served as a great introduction to the works of these Greek and Roman thinkers, at least for me, and I enjoyed interacting with them and reading them so much that it got me excited to actually read their works, their full works. And I also picked up some other Greek ancient classics. I especially wrote extensive notes on Plato. At first, the things that he was saying sounded a bit ridiculous, but then when I actually sat down and reflected and took notes, it took me into directions that I never would have thought possible. And it sparked some really interesting thoughts. There's a part of Plato's Republic which I purchased now because I was so impressed. And the dialogue says, "And aren't things that are in the best condition least affected by change from the outside? And isn't the bravest and wisest soul least disturbed and affected by external influence?" This is so inspiring. So anything that is in good condition, whether by nature or art or both, is least subject to change from outside. There was also a part with Sappho's poetry that really blew me away and that I also marked, and it really got me excited to read her work. Now, like I said, this novel also has advice from these Greek and Roman thinkers for writers. And as it happens, I have a commonplace book that I use for writing advice. And I really want to share this writing advice with you. By the way, for those who are interested, this is just a small notebook from Paper Blanks, the brand. And it's the Michelangelo edition. And by the way, this is just a summary of what I have read and what I wanted to keep in my commonplace book. Writing advice from Horace. Number 1, need for organic unity. Every aspect and part of the work must be appropriate to the nature of that work as a whole. Number 2, avoid mixing genres, avoid creating characters who lack verisimilitude. Now, I actually had to look up that word, and it means a character not being true or real. Number 3, dramatic characters must be true to life. When you see me do that, that's because at the end of a page, I don't like using the final lines, and so I turn my notebook and I just write upside down. It looks really cool, you should try it. Number 4, polish, 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 rather than publish, publish, publish. And number 5, if you want to move me to tears, you must first feel the grief yourself. This is my absolute favorite because I experience this a lot myself when I am writing a manuscript. I sometimes really have tears in my eyes at certain scenes. Now, writing advice from Longinus. Number 1, overwhelm the audience with emotion. Number 2, noble emotion in the right setting. Number 3, effective use of stylistic and rhetorical figures to increase emotional impact. Number 4, skillful use of metaphor and other figures of speech. I support that. Number 5, organic unity. And number 6, effective arrangement of words. This is really, really good advice. Then, writing advice from Aristotle. Keep the scene before your eyes as though you're a witness. Number 2, first plan the general outline, then expand. Number 3, master metaphor. Again. And then writing advice from Horace. Give the appropriate manners to characters of varying dispositions and years. I'm going to be returning to this advice a lot. Luckily, I use most of them already. And it's very inspiring to know that it comes from the great Greek and Roman thinkers. I highly recommend this book. And don't be afraid if you haven't read any of their works yet. This serves as a great introduction. I don't think it will be too difficult. And I do highly recommend to take notes to reflect. There will be moments where you will very much disagree with a certain sentence or a certain thought. I invite you to journal about it, to try and have a conversation with, for example, Plato. Really go into discussion with him, and you will see that it will spark some great ideas. If you love literature, make sure to stick around because I would love to see you next week.